Sweat plays a huge role in the world of Dune. The novel takes place mostly on the planet Arrakis, a dangerously hot planet where inhabitants must recycle their own sweat to survive. But despite sweat's life-saving role, the film adaptation rarely shows anybody sweating at all, and when it does show sweat, it's inconsistent. Of course, this is probably not an accident or an oversight. It's an intentional choice by the filmmakers, and this use of sweat in Dune not only shows the importance of sweat in movies as a whole, but it also reveals why a movie like Dune needed more of it. So let's take a look at some of our favorite movie characters and ask them a question.
Why are you so sweaty?
At first glance, sweat doesn't carry the same emotional weight as more direct emotional cues like seeing blood or watching someone cry. Sweat doesn't signify death or sadness. It's a seemingly straightforward biological response to heat or stress. But like blood and tears, sweat in movies is carefully choreographed. The sweat we see in movies is often controlled not by the actor's sweat glands, but by the makeup department. It's not like Sylvester Stallone can maintain that insane level of sweat for an entire day of shooting. Between takes, makeup artist Leonard Engelman sprayed him down with a water-glycerin mixture that mimicked the viscosity of sweat, making Stallone look hard at work. Thanks to movie magic, actors who look sweaty and exhausted on screen could actually feel quite comfortable on set. But that's not always the case. Makeup artists also have to deal with the opposite, keeping uncomfortable, sweaty actors looking dry. Whether it's thick costumes, makeup prosthetics, or powerful lighting equipment, film sets tend to run on the sweaty side, like when the actors in It's a Wonderful Life had to wear winter coats while filming on a soundstage in 90-degree weather. The dojo scene in The Matrix required intense lights so the camera could capture slow motion, which meant the makeup team had to pat down the actors in between takes. The reason to remove sweat is obvious for It's a Wonderful Life. It would look strange for actors to look hot in the winter. But in The Matrix, the lack of sweat does more by explaining the world of The Matrix. Morpheus shouldn't sweat in the dojo because he knows how to bend the laws of physics in The Matrix, and since Neo hasn't learned that yet, he still sweats. So when we do see Morpheus sweat during his interrogation, we can tell he's no longer in control. So sweat can work as a sort of visual shorthand, showing who's under pressure and who isn't.
Don't say it! Don't you say it!
Left.
Come on!
And this phenomenon reveals what makes sweat so important in movies. Sweat isn't just a biological response to heat, it's also a biological response to stress.
Something wrong? Patrick? You're sweating.
So directors use sweat in this way to give us insight into certain characters. Even within the same exact room, the emotional characters can sweat a lot, while the cool, analytical ones don't sweat at all.
Don't you ever sweat? No, I don't.
You may not notice it consciously, but our lizard brains definitely associate sweat with stress. Remember the opening shot of the first teaser trailer for The Force Awakens?
Have you felt it?
The narration is right, you can feel it. Sweat is crucial to this moment because it signals that Finn is in the middle of a chase, and it adds to the mystery of what's off screen and where all the sounds are coming from. Compare that to Paul in Dune, who looks like he's just getting started. The movie Dune shows just how much creative liberty makeup departments have when it comes to sweat. Many characters don't sweat at all, or they sweat inconsistently. Take this scene, where one character sweats, but Paul is bone dry. I'm sure most people watching the movie didn't notice this inconsistency, but this choice does have an emotional effect on the viewer. By making Paul the dry one in this scene, he feels more calm, royal, and unaffected by the toxic environment. Filmmakers often reserve sweat for those actively working, which has the added effect of separating the pampered elite from the ones performing the labor. In this way, sweat can emphasize class divides, showing who suffers and who gets to stay dry. In Blue Collar, Jerry starts off as a sweaty auto worker, but by the end, he has transformed into a white-collar worker with a clean brow. So sweat can accomplish much more than just showing the temperature. In It's a Wonderful Life, James Stewart's character actually sweats a lot, even during a winter snowstorm. Stewart probably looked like that because the set was nearly 100 degrees, but it doesn't feel unrealistic. On the contrary, by having him sweat in the middle of winter, the audience feels his emotional anguish that much more. Some filmmakers go one step further and make their characters sweatier than humanly possible. This exaggeration usually leads to comedy, but it can also work in dramatic movies. In Raging Bull, the makeup team had to cover Robert De Niro in Vaseline so that sweat would fly off his face when he moved. And that effect, combined with the animal sound effects and disorienting camera work, creates a boxing ring full of violence and chaos. But perhaps the greatest practitioner of sweaty characters comes from the director Sergio Leone. Take the 9-minute opening credits in his spaghetti western Once Upon a Time in the West, which consists of 3 silent gunslingers sitting around waiting for the train. A scene so uneventful should feel incredibly boring. So how did Sergio Leone make a bunch of people doing nothing feel so electric? Part of the magic comes from the characters' menacing introductions and the initial mystery of why they appeared at the station. But I think the true reason why Leone could hold onto these characters for so long is simply because they're all so irritated. One has water drip on his head, one spends way too long dealing with a fly, and the other sits around looking bored, all while a windmill creaks in the background. Not much happens physically, but a lot happens emotionally. They aren't moving, but they are sweating, so you can feel their internal intensity long before they fire their guns. When you really think about it, the majority of a shootout in a Western movie is just two guys staring each other down. The characters aren't actually doing anything, but we can feel the stakes beneath that motionless surface. In these moments, each bead of sweat matters as much as the sound design or the camera or the film score, because sweat betrays the true intensity within the stillness. But the characters in Sergio Leone films tend to sweat not just during climactic moments, but throughout the entire movie. Sweat creates a lingering reminder of the constant, uncomfortable heat, and of the never-ending harshness of their world. Other movies like Dog Day Afternoon and Do the Right Thing similarly use constant sweat to show pent-up tension in their respective Brooklyn neighborhoods. But Dune chooses not to go this route. Paul doesn't sweat when it's hot. He only sweats when he's undergoing mental anguish, like during the pain test scene or when he hallucinates. His sweating inside the tent gives the scene a claustrophobic feel, and the way his sweat combines with his tears creates an emotional cocktail that really sells the moment. So the Dune makeup department reserves sweat for the internal climactic moments, but that choice comes at the expense of not really getting a sense for the external heat of the planet. And I think that's a shame, because going the route of the spaghetti western would have given the viewer a constant reminder of the inhospitable nature of the planet Arrakis.
Well, when I came home from school, my head started to get really hot.
At the end of the day, sweat is one of the great human equalizers. Everybody does it, and it's not something a person has control over. So when the makeup department makes a decision on sweat, they're essentially choosing to add or remove humanity from a character or from a setting. So when Dune doesn't use sweat often, it subtly makes House Atreides feel invincible, when in reality, the house had trouble adjusting to the harsh environment of Arrakis. We don't get to feel that tension as strongly with such dry-looking characters. In a world where sweat literally keeps you alive, I think the absence of sweat drains some life from the story. And in a cinematic landscape increasingly propped up by CGI and polished big-budget experiences, there's more need than ever for the delightfully human imperfection that is sweat. Because we don't go to the movies just to see an external conflict, we also go to see an internal one. So the next time you watch a great movie, remember that it took 3 things to make it: blood, sweat, and tears. As always, thank you to my Patreon supporters, who got to see the video early, and some even got to help out with the script. Thanks for watching.